There is no worse prison than a mind that has decided to be its own jailer. Money isn't just numbers. It's not just currency. It's largely a reflection of the stories we tell ourselves and the beliefs we allow ourselves to adopt. What you're about to hear isn't just audio, but a guide that seeks to break the invisible barriers that have kept you away from the abundance you deserve. This text isn't meant to give you magical formulas, but to show you that true change begins when you dare to challenge the beliefs that have limited you for so long. Written by an author who has chosen to remain anonymous, it doesn't present itself as a traditional work, but as a series of reflections and teachings from the diary of a mind in constant struggle and self-improvement. More than a theoretical text, it's a journey toward an awareness of your own limiting beliefs about money and wealth. It's an invitation to look beyond the obvious, to question what you take for granted, and to start creating a new personal story about money based on freedom and not on fear. Here, you'll find the experiences, fears, and realizations of someone who set out to transform his life from within, sharing the keys that allowed him to tear down the mental walls he had unknowingly built. This guide doesn't tell you what to think, but invites you to think in a new way, to discover what it truly means to live in abundance and transcend the merely material, because true wealth begins when you can see your limitations not as a destination, but as a starting point. Beliefs about money, the inner power, author unknown. Sometimes I wonder why it takes us so long to recognize the power that lies within us. I remember those moments sitting alone in my room with thoughts echoing like distant sounds. There was always something missing, a piece that didn't fit. But what was it? Why did I feel that something inside me couldn't find its voice? The question accompanied me for a long time until one day, everything changed. There was an afternoon when exhaustion defeated me, not just physical exhaustion, but that weariness of the soul, the kind of exhaustion that makes you feel like you're observing your life from the outside, unable to touch it or shape it. I found myself wondering if I was destined to walk the same path as so many others, without changing anything, without making a sound. A close person told me, maybe you're not really awake. That made me think. What does it mean to be awake? At first glance, it might seem like a simple question, but it has deep layers. And at that moment, I didn't fully understand it. Days passed, maybe weeks, with that phrase echoing in my head. One night, the answer came in silence. I was watching a storm from my bedroom window. The sky seemed to be at war with itself, lightning tearing through the darkness and thunder roaring as if they wanted to shake the very earth. And in the midst of all that chaos, I discovered something. It was an internal lightning bolt, a spark that ignited a question. Why are you stopping? What was I stopping in my life? Why were there so many invisible barriers created by my own fears, insecurities, and doubts? And suddenly, I understood. Every external storm reflected an internal storm, a struggle of beliefs and desires, of potential and fear. The answer didn't come as an absolute truth, but as an invitation to look beyond my own shadows, to understand that we are not what we do, but what we believe we are capable of doing. It was as if the sky itself whispered to me, that true power isn't in what we possess, but in what we decide to transform. So I took the leap and started to rebuild myself from within. I decided not to fight against my storms, but to dance with them. I began to identify those limiting beliefs that had taken over my mind, and for the first time, I felt the need to question them. I asked myself again and again, is this really mine, or did someone make me believe that's how it should be? In those moments, I understood something important. Awakening our inner power doesn't mean discovering something new, but getting rid of everything that makes us doubt our own brilliance. It's not about adding more. It's about letting go of what's not necessary. It's like removing layers of dust from a jewel that has been hidden for too long. There comes a moment when silence becomes a mirror, where every unspoken word, every forgotten dream, begins to speak to you. And in that reflection, I saw my strength and my fragility, and I understood that both were necessary, that I wasn't weak for feeling fear, but human, and that fear was just a shadow that disappears when you decide to walk toward the light. Today, if someone asked me how to awaken their inner power, I would tell them that it's not something that happens all at once. It's not a grandiose event, but a series of small revelations. Every time you choose to love yourself despite your mistakes, every time you forgive your own failures and keep walking, you awaken a little more. Every time you decide to stop being the victim of your story and take on the role of the protagonist, you are opening a door to that power. It's as if my whole life had been a preparation for this moment. The key isn't to look outside, but to look within and recognize that even though our doubts are strong, our essence is more powerful. That every fall has been a lesson, and that true. Growth is born from our deepest roots. Perhaps today you too are facing your own storm. Maybe your doubts and fears are like thunder and lightning in your mind. But let me tell you something. The storm doesn't come to destroy you, but to remind you that you have the ability to shine even in the midst of darkness. That is the most important lesson. There are no secret formulas, only the will to awaken to what is already within you. Perhaps you're wondering, what if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough? And the answer is simple. You don't need to be perfect, just brave, because true inner power isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to walk despite it. I've always been told that money isn't everything, and in many ways, it's true. But it's also true that the beliefs we have about money can define who we are, how we move in the world, and how much we dare to dream. I had never thought about this until one day I found myself looking at my life as if it were a movie written by someone else. Have you ever felt that way, like you're playing a role you didn't choose, following a script you didn't write? I have. There were patterns in my life that seemed to repeat themselves like lines written in a play that had already been rehearsed too many times. Moments when everything seemed to get better, and then suddenly return to the same starting point. No matter how much I tried to change my situation, my results always seemed to reflect a story that had already been decided for me. It was a night when, tired of going around in circles in my mind, I decided to go for a walk. I wasn't looking for anything, just a little fresh air. At some point along the way, I ended up sitting on a park bench, watching the city lights reflect on the lake. And suddenly, a question came to me. What if your financial life were a book? I thought about it for a moment and realized something. We are all, in a way, living a story. A script not only written by our hands, but also by our experiences, the words we heard as children, the ideas we absorbed without even questioning them. It was then that I understood. I am not just a reader of my story, I can also be the author. But how do you rewrite a script that seems to be set in stone? That's where I began to understand that it's not about erasing what's written, but about learning to write over it, to find new words that can transform an old chapter into something completely new. I started by asking myself, what have I believed? About money my whole life? The answers didn't take long to arrive. I heard the voices of my childhood, those that told me that money was the root of all evil or that only the lucky could prosper. I remembered the arguments at home about the bills that didn't add up, the reproaches for every expense, and that constant feeling of scarcity. Has it ever happened to you to grow up in an environment where money seemed to be a constant shadow, a weight that reminded us that it wasn't enough? Those beliefs take root in our hearts and become part of our identity. But the most important thing I discovered was that those beliefs weren't mine, but an echo of the stories that others had lived before me, and so began a slow but necessary process of dismantling those old beliefs. It wasn't easy, because there's something in us that resists letting go of what is known even if it's hurting us. Sometimes letting go means facing that uncomfortable void that invites us to create something new from scratch. It was in those moments that I decided to literally sit down and write a new financial script for my life. I wrote how I wanted to feel about money, how I wanted to relate to it. I started talking to myself with new words, as if I were a character I was bringing to life. I realized that my perception of abundance didn't depend on the number of zeros in my account, but on the freedom to be able to choose how to live. Then I changed the focus of my story. I stopped seeing money as a goal and started seeing it as a tool to create experiences, to help others, to grow. You might be wondering, how do you do that? And the answer isn't a magical recipe, but a constant decision. It's choosing every day to let go of that scarcity mindset and to make the conscious decision to believe that there is more, that there is always more. It's recognizing that we are not limited by what we have lived, but by what we decide to believe about it. I remember reading somewhere that the mind is like a garden. You can sow seeds of fear or hope, and in both cases, what you plant will grow. So I began to pull out those weeds that had grown without my permission. Every time a thought of scarcity arose, I would stop and ask myself, is this true, or is it just a story I've been told? Over time, I discovered that I wasn't alone in this process. Many people have been led to believe that money is an enemy, a source of problems, or a burden. We've been taught to fear it or to desire it with greed. But what if we simply chose to see it as energy? Energy that flows, that transforms, that grows when we nourish it with gratitude. Writing a new financial script doesn't mean denying the reality of difficulties, but having the courage to look beyond them. It is an act of self-love, a reminder that we are not destined to repeat the same stories, because in the end, life is not just about surviving, but about learning to flourish. They say that the first step to changing anything in life is to be aware of it. But what does it really mean to be aware? The word has become commonplace, as if we all know what it's about. But the reality is that there are levels of consciousness that we never dare to explore, levels where we discover that the life we have been living is only a shadow of who we really are. I remember a time in my life where everything seemed to be on autopilot. The decisions I made, the thoughts I had, even the words I said seemed to come from a mechanical place, as if I were following a script that no longer belonged to me. It was then that I asked myself, who is really making the decisions in my life? There is a silence that we avoid, that empty space where the questions we fear most reside. I had avoided that silence for years, filling it with noise, with busyness, with superficial goals that didn't really take me anywhere. But one day, I dared to do something different. I truly stopped. And in doing so, I heard something new. It wasn't an external voice or a profound thought. It was my soul whispering, "Wake up." Awakening is a simple verb, but its meaning is profound. Awakening doesn't just mean opening your eyes in the morning, but opening your heart to the truth of who you are, of what you are living, of what you really feel. It was in that awakening that I understood that until then, I had lived in a kind of dream, following a path that I had not consciously chosen. Awareness, as I discovered, is not a state of permanent enlightenment. It is a constant lesson, a daily decision to look beyond appearances and delve into the essence. It was one afternoon, walking on a path in the middle of a forest, when I understood this. The wind gently moved the branches of the trees, and the leaves fell gracefully, as if each one of them knew its purpose. I stopped for a moment and thought, how many things in my life are waiting to be let go? It's funny how nature can teach us so much about ourselves. Just as the leaves don't cling to the tree that gave them birth, we too must learn to let go of the beliefs, patterns, and fears that no longer serve us. But that's not possible if we are not first aware that we are holding on to them. I remember reading that awareness is like a mirror that reflects not only what we want to see, but also what we avoid looking at. And it was in those moments of deep reflection that I began to see my own shadows, those aspects of me that I had denied or avoided for fear of not being enough, for fear of failing, for fear of being judged. And then the question arose, what would you do if you knew that everything you have feared is nothing more than an illusion? The answer wasn't clear at first, but slowly I began to feel a kind of liberation, as if every limiting thought was dissolved by the simple decision to be aware of it. It was as if by observing my fears, they lost their power. Awareness is the key to transformation, because when you become aware of something, you can no longer ignore it. When you are aware of a belief that limits you, you give yourself the opportunity to choose a new one. When you are aware of an emotion that weighs you down, you can decide to let it go. And when you are aware of your worth, nothing can make you doubt it. In those days of awakening, I realized that life is not something that happens to us, but something that we create from our awareness. It's not about waiting for circumstances to change, but about changing the way we see them. And there, in that simple choice, lies the transformation. Someone once asked me, how do you become more aware? And the answer is not a magical technique, but a constant practice. It's about stopping from time to time and asking yourself, is what I'm feeling really mine, or is it something I've inherited? It's about questioning every thought that tells you that you are not enough and daring to challenge it. It's about observing your life with the eyes of an explorer willing to discover what has been hidden in plain sight. The power of awareness doesn't reside in changing things instantly, but in allowing ourselves to see them as they are. And once we see them, we can transform them. It's like opening a window in a dark room. Suddenly, everything lights up, and we can rearrange the furniture, clean the dust, and decorate the space in a new way. Transformation through awareness is not a linear path, but a journey full of discoveries. It's not about becoming a perfect person, but about being brave enough to accept our own imperfection and give ourselves permission to evolve. I remember a day in my childhood when I saw my grandfather working in the garden. His hands were strong and careful as he tilled the soil, preparing the ground to plant new seeds. I watched him for a long time and finally approached him with the curiosity of a child and asked, "Why do you do all this before planting the seeds?" He smiled with that calmness that only years can give and replied, "The roots need space to grow strong, son. If you don't prepare the soil, nothing will really flourish." At that moment, I didn't understand the depth of his words. But years later, when I began to reflect on prosperity, I knew there was a powerful lesson in that garden. Throughout life, we are taught to chase goals, to run after success, to accumulate achievements and wealth, but we rarely stop to think about the soil where all of that is being sown. We don't think about the invisible foundations, those that support our decisions, our beliefs, and ultimately our prosperity. One day, in a conversation with a friend who had achieved great financial success, I dared to ask him a question. What is your secret to always staying stable in the midst of so many responsibilities? He looked at me and after a pause said, "The secret isn't in what I do, but in how I think and how I feel about what I do." It was at that moment that I understood something essential. Prosperity isn't built only with external actions, but with the quality of our internal roots, those roots that are nourished by our deepest beliefs and by the values that we embrace, even in moments of uncertainty. Many people think that prosperity is simply a matter of numbers and visible results. But the truth is that the most important foundations are the ones you can't see. They are the beliefs that sustain our actions, the decisions we make based on confidence and not on fear, and the way we relate to ourselves and to the world. I began to reflect on my own foundations. What were the beliefs that had supported my decisions until that moment? Were they based on a feeling of scarcity or on a sense of abundance? It was a difficult question to answer at first because, as I discovered, most of our beliefs are deeply rooted in past experiences. For a long time, my life had been guided by the fear of not having enough, by the pressure to meet expectations that weren't even mine. But when I dared to question those foundations, I began to see something new. I realized that my roots were in a soil full of doubts, insecurities, and limiting beliefs that had never belonged to me. And then a key question arose. What would you do if you knew that you can choose the ground where your roots will grow? That question changed me, because until that moment, I had lived believing that I had no choice, that my past, my experiences, and my fears defined the ground on which I had to flourish. But I was wrong. I discovered that we can choose our soil. We can nourish our roots with thoughts of abundance, with gratitude, with the certainty that we are capable of creating a life full of purpose and meaning. True prosperity is not measured only in economic terms. It is measured in the quality of your inner peace, in the solidity of your relationships, and in the confidence with which you make every decision. It's those invisible things, those internal foundations, that truly determine how high you can reach. I remember a mentor once told me, if your roots aren't deep, any strong wind will knock you down. That metaphor resonated with me because I understood that many times we only focus on the surface, on what's visible, without realizing that the most important things are built in the darkness, away from the eyes of the world. Today, I want to invite you to pause and ask yourself, on what foundations am I building my life? Perhaps, like me, you have been planting your dreams in a soil that needs to be renewed. Perhaps you have believed that prosperity is just a matter of money and have neglected the value of your peace of mind and your emotional well-being. The invisible foundations are those small things that seem insignificant, but that over time determine the strength of everything we build. They are the thoughts we cultivate every day, the beliefs we choose to feed, and the way we treat ourselves in the midst of challenges. On this path to prosperity, don't focus only on the destination, but on the quality of the soil where you are, planting your roots. Because a prosperous life is not only one that achieves success, but one that remains firm despite the storms. If today you feel that your foundations are not strong enough, don't worry. We all have the ability to renew our soil, to let go of what doesn't serve us, and to nourish what truly sustains us. In the end, it's not about having everything figured out, but about having the courage to look within and make the necessary changes. It was an evening like any other, one of those when silence becomes a companion and the echo of thoughts resonates louder than any external word. I was in my room, staring at the ceiling as if I could find some answer in the shadows to all those questions I was carrying inside. It was in one of those moments of reflection that a simple but powerful question arose in my mind. What do I really believe about myself and about life? That question led me back to seemingly forgotten memories, to words said by others that had been engraved as unbreakable truths, to moments when I felt that I wasn't enough, that my dreams were too big, or that my essence was too small for what life was asking of me. And then I realized something essential. Our beliefs are like the glass through which we see the world, and without realizing it, that glass can be distorted by experiences, fears, and other people's opinions. From childhood, we absorb beliefs without questioning them. We hear them from our parents, our teachers, society, and over time they become part of us. Without realizing it, we begin to live lives that we have not consciously chosen, but that have been defined by those beliefs that we never decided to adopt. I remember a conversation with a close friend, someone I always admired for his confidence and determination. I asked him, "How do you manage not to be limited by what others think?" He laughed softly and said, "It's not that I don't care. It's that I decided not to give it more weight than necessary. I learned to redefine what I believe about myself, and that changed everything." His words left me thinking, is it possible to redefine our beliefs? The idea seemed strange to me at first, because I had lived so many years without questioning my way of thinking. But what if beliefs were nothing more than stories that we tell ourselves over and over again? And what if, in the end, all those stories could be rewritten? I decided to do an exercise. I sat down with a blank sheet of paper and wrote down all the beliefs I had about myself, about money, about relationships, and about life. It was a revealing process. I discovered that many of those beliefs were not mine. Instead, I had inherited them from my environment, from past situations, or from unresolved fears. At that moment, a question arose that changed my perspective. What would happen if I consciously chose the beliefs I want to hold? The idea excited and scared me at the same time because it involved an act of courage, letting go of the known and venturing to believe in something new. But I decided to try it. Little by little, I began to replace each limiting belief with a new one that would empower me instead of holding me back. It wasn't an immediate or easy process, but I realized that redefining our beliefs is an art, a creative act that requires patience and compassion for ourselves. Redefining your beliefs doesn't mean denying what you have lived, but reinterpreting it from a place of love and acceptance. It's looking at yourself in the mirror and choosing to see beyond your mistakes, to see beyond your failures, and to find in each of them an opportunity to grow. Many times, our limiting beliefs are deeply rooted in fear, fear of not being enough, fear of being rejected, fear of failing. But something powerful happens when you decide to challenge those fears and ask yourself, is this really true? Or is it just a story I've told myself so many times that it has become my reality? Along this path, I realized that redefining our beliefs is not a destination, but a constant journey. A journey in which every day you have the opportunity to choose, to rewrite, to transform. And in that process, you free yourself from the invisible chains that have kept you in a place where you no longer want to be. Today, I want to invite you to pause and ask yourself, what beliefs are limiting me right now, and what new beliefs could I adopt to build the life I truly desire? There are no right or wrong answers, just conscious decisions that bring you closer to the life you long for. The art of redefining your beliefs is an act of courage. It is choosing every day to trust yourself despite the doubts and the voices that try to stop you. It is giving yourself permission to let go of other people's expectations and embrace your authenticity. And it is remembering that your value is not measured by what others think, but by what you decide to believe about yourself. On this path to prosperity, learning to redefine your beliefs will give you the freedom to create a new story, a story that aligns with your essence, with your purpose, and with the truth of who you really are. There was an afternoon when everything felt heavy, as if time itself was reminding me of each of my decisions, my mistakes, and those moments I could never let go of. The following is a translation of the provided text from Spanish to English. It was one of those days when the past seemed more real than the present, and I asked myself, why am I still carrying this? At some point in our lives, we all accumulate invisible burdens. Sometimes these burdens are words that left their mark on us, decisions we regret having made, or simply the guilt of not having been who we thought we should be. But what's most powerful is when those burdens become chains, anchors that prevent us from moving toward the future we want to build. I remember a specific moment years ago. I was sitting on the shore of a lake, watching the calm water reflect the sky. And in that silence, I realized how many times I had tried to move forward without letting go of the weight of my past. How many times had I sought freedom without realizing that I myself was holding the chains that kept me a prisoner? It was then that I understood something important. The past has no power over us except the power we grant it. But letting go is not an act of forgetting. It's an act of forgiving. And forgiving not only those who hurt us, but above all, forgiving ourselves for the times we didn't know how to act the way we wanted to. Sometimes we cling to pain as if it were an indispensable part of our identity, We define ourselves by our wounds, by our failures, and we tell ourselves the same story of defeat and guilt over and over again. But what would happen if we stopped being the guardians of our own pain? What would happen if we chose to free ourselves from those chains? Freeing yourself from the chains of the past is not easy. It requires the courage to look back without judging yourself, to observe each experience as a teacher that came to teach you something about yourself. It requires self-love to be able to embrace those moments of darkness and thank them for the lessons they gave you. On my own journey, I discovered that the heaviest chains were not the experiences themselves, but the stories I told myself about them. Stories that said I was not enough, that I didn't deserve more, that I was destined to repeat the same mistakes. But in the end, life taught me that we are more than our stories, that we have the power to write something new. There comes a moment when you face yourself and must decide whether to continue being a prisoner of your memories or to become the creator of your future. That moment is terrifying because it involves letting go of the pain that, ironically, we have become accustomed to. But it is also liberating because it reminds us that we are bigger than our past. Someone once asked me, "How do I stop carrying my past?" And my answer was, don't try to get rid of it. Instead, learn to accept it and move forward with love, because the past cannot be erased, but it can be transformed. Every wound can become a scar, and every scar a reminder of our strength. It's like a river that has changed its course. The water that has already passed cannot return, but it has left its mark on the rocks, forming a new path. That's how we should see our experiences, as the current that has shaped us, but not as the one that defines us. In the process of freeing yourself from the chains of the past, there is a crucial step: forgiving yourself. Forgiving yourself for the times you allowed yourself to undervalue your own worth, for the moments when you let fear take control, for the decisions you made from a place of insecurity, and in that forgiveness, you will find the peace you have been seeking. It's not about ignoring what happened, but about looking at it with new eyes, about recognizing that every experience was an opportunity to grow, even the ones that hurt you the most. It is an act of self-love, a reminder that you deserve to be free, that you deserve to move forward without the chains of the past holding your steps. For as long as I can remember, financial freedom was an idea that seemed abstract, like a distant horizon that only a few reached. In my mind, financial freedom was not just a number in a bank account, but a feeling of peace, of lightness, of knowing that I didn't depend on something external to feel fulfilled. However, I didn't always see things this way. There was a time in my life where money was a constant source of worry. No matter how much I tried to save or how hard I worked to improve my situation, there was always a latent fear, a feeling that it would never be enough. I wondered, is financial freedom just an unattainable dream? But something in me refused to believe that was my destiny. I remember one day in particular. I was sitting in a cafe watching people rush by. They all seemed to be looking for something, chasing invisible goals, and on their faces was a mix of anxiety and exhaustion that I couldn't ignore. I saw myself reflected in them, in that tireless search for a relief that seemed to never arrive. It was in that moment that I asked myself a different question. What does it truly mean to be free? The answer didn't come immediately, but in the days that followed, I began to realize something important. Freedom is not just about what you have, but about how you live what you have. It's about your relationship with money, the beliefs you have adopted about it, and the value you place on yourself beyond what you possess. Talking about financial freedom is entering a territory that is often plagued by fears, insecurities, and inherited stories. For me, it was a journey that began with small decisions, with the conscious choice to stop seeing money as an enemy or as a source of anxiety. I began to question the beliefs I had absorbed since childhood, those that said abundance was for others, not for me. And then I asked myself another question. What would happen if I started to see money as a tool and not as a goal? That idea opened a new path for me. I realized that in my mind, I had tied my happiness to money, as if I could only be free when I reached a certain amount or a certain lifestyle. But the true journey to financial freedom does not begin with money, but with an internal transformation. I understood that freedom was not something I could find outside, but something I had to build from within. True freedom is born the moment you decide to live without fear, when you choose to trust yourself and your ability to create and receive, because money is nothing more than a reflection of your relationship with yourself, of how much you value yourself, of how much abundance you allow into your life. I began to practice something simple but powerful: gratitude. Instead of focusing on what I was missing, I chose to be thankful for what I already had. And I'm not just talking about material things, but about experiences, people, and opportunities that came to me every day. It was a subtle but profound change, because gratitude is like opening a window in a dark room. Suddenly, the light comes in, and everything looks different. On this journey, there were moments when I doubted myself, when I felt like I wasn't making progress, that external circumstances were stronger than my will. But it was in those moments that I learned the most, because I understood that freedom is not the absence of difficulties, but the ability to walk despite them. Someone once asked me, "How did you manage to change your mindset about money?" My answer was simple. I decided to see abundance as a state of the soul, not as a final destination, and in that change of perspective, I found something I had been looking for without knowing it: peace. The journey to financial freedom is not a straight path, but a process of self-discovery. It's not just about earning more or having more, but about living in a way that reflects your values, your dreams, and your truth. It's about learning to let go of other people's expectations and to define success on your own terms, because in the end, true financial freedom is having the courage to live from a place of authenticity, to trust that you are capable of creating the life you desire. It's not about accumulating more, but about being more conscious, more grateful, more free. Once, a mentor told me something that completely changed the way I saw life. We were walking through a park in the autumn, and as the leaves fell slowly, he looked at me and said, "Success is like a tree. What you see on the outside is only the result of what you have sown within you." At that moment, his words seemed beautiful, but I didn't fully understand them. However, over time, I discovered the truth they held. We have been taught to chase success as if it were an external goal, something we must achieve or conquer, when in reality, success is something that must first be sown and cultivated from the mind and heart. There was a time when I, too, ran after visible goals, believing that if I could achieve them, I could finally feel fulfilled. But no matter how hard I tried, I always felt like something was missing, as if my life were a garden full of beautiful flowers but without deep roots. I wondered, why, despite my achievements, do I still feel like it's not enough? It was then that I began to understand that it's not just about what you achieve, but about who you become in the process. True success is not something you can hold in your hands, but something that grows inside you, in the way you think, in how you talk to yourself, and in the quality of your intentions. I remember an afternoon after a series of failures that had left me exhausted and disillusioned. I sat in my room, staring into space, and asked myself a question I had never dared to ask before. What do I really want? It wasn't a question about specific goals or material dreams, but about what I deeply longed for in my life. In those moments of introspection, I realized that my deepest desires were not just about achieving accomplishments, but about living in harmony with my values, about feeling whole regardless of circumstances. And in that process, I understood that success must first be planted in my mind before it can manifest in my life. Sowing success from the mind is an act of faith. It's choosing to see beyond visible obstacles and trusting the invisible process, like a gardener who plants a seed in the ground and trusts that with time, it will bear fruit. It's not about forcing growth, but about nourishing it, about taking care of your thoughts and your beliefs as a gardener takes care of their garden. Someone once asked me, how can I start sowing success in my life? My answer was simple. Start by planting it in your mind. Take care of what you think, what you believe, and what you say about yourself, because the mind is like a fertile field, and every thought you plant has the potential to become a reality. On my own path, I discovered that thoughts are like seeds. There are thoughts that blossom and give life, and there are others that become weeds, invading our internal garden and suffocating our dreams. It was then that I decided to become more aware of the seeds I was planting in my mind. Every time a limiting thought appeared, I asked myself, is this a seed I want to see grow? Sowing success from the mind involves an act of awareness and responsibility. It is choosing every day what thoughts you want to cultivate, what beliefs you want to strengthen, and what vision of yourself you want to see reflected in your life. It is not about denying challenges or fears, but about learning to face them with a clear mind and an open heart. In this process, I learned something fundamental. You cannot harvest a different fruit if you keep sowing the same seeds. If you want an external change, you must first make an internal change, and that change begins with the choice of the seeds you decide to plant in your mind every day. There is a pattern that we all follow, consciously or unconsciously, in our relationship with money. It's like a script that we have unknowingly memorized since childhood and continue to perform at every stage of our lives. It wasn't until I found myself caught in a repetitive cycle of financial stress and frustration that I began to wonder, where does this story really come from? From a young age, I heard conversations about money in my house. My father would say that we had to be cautious and save every penny because life could change in the blink of an eye. My mother, on the other hand, talked about enjoying what you have while you have it. Between these two worlds, I developed a confused and contradictory view of money, not knowing which of the two was correct. Years later, as an adult, I continued to feel that confusion in my life. Every time I tried to plan my financial future, there was an internal voice that told me that no matter how much I tried, everything could somehow fall apart. And the more I tried to control every aspect, the more anxiety I felt. It was then that I asked myself a crucial question. What is the pattern I am following? It was like opening a door to a place I had avoided for a long time. I began to observe my beliefs, my fears, the automatic habits I repeated without even being aware of them. And I realized that I was not alone. Many of us live our lives following a financial pattern that we have not even chosen, but that guides us in every decision, in every expense, in every investment. Money is not just a tool. It is also a reflection of our deepest beliefs. If you believe that money is scarce, your mind will continuously look for signs of lack. If you believe that money is a necessary evil, you will feel guilty about wanting to prosper. And if, as happened to me, you have inherited the belief that money vanishes easily, you will always live expecting the next crisis to arrive. One afternoon, while having coffee with a friend who had managed to build a stable financial life, I asked him, "What do you think is the key to having a good relationship with money?" He looked at me with a smile and replied, "It's not just what you do with money, but what you believe about it. Change your beliefs, and you will change your reality." His words resonated with me, and I decided to begin dismantling that secret pattern that had been governing my life for so long. It was not an immediate process, because sometimes deprogramming inherited beliefs is like learning to walk again. But I understood that the first step was to identify those beliefs and question them. I started by asking myself, what story am I telling myself about money? And as I wrote my answers, I noticed how many of them did not come from my own experiences, but from the stories of others, from my parents' worries, from the economic crises I had seen on the news, from society's opinions. Recognizing the secret pattern of money in my life was like opening an ancient map, one that had been drawn by other people's hands with paths that I had not chosen to travel. But by seeing it clearly, I realized that I had the power to redraw that map, to create a new pattern based on my truth, my values, and the life I wanted to build. And it was then that I understood something essential. Money itself does not have a fixed pattern. It is our mind that creates it. Money can be a tool of fear or of love, of scarcity or of abundance, depending on how you decide to see it. Changing that pattern does not mean changing the amount you possess, but the way you relate to it. Someone once asked me, how can I change my relationship with money if I have lived my whole life in scarcity? And my answer was, the scarcity is not in what you have, but in what you believe you deserve. Because changing the secret pattern of money is not just about numbers, but about transforming your mindset from the root. On my own path, I began to see money not as an end, but as a means. I began to be grateful for every opportunity to learn, to grow, to provide value to others. And in that change of perspective, the anxiety began to fade, giving way to a feeling of peace and confidence. At some point in my life, I realized that scarcity was not just a financial state, but a mindset, a way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves. It was like a fog that clouded my vision, making me believe that there was always something missing, something I was not, something I could not achieve. I remember spending years chasing goals with a constant sense of urgency, as if time was running out and opportunity was vanishing before my eyes. I had success in some things and failures in others, but the feeling of not being enough never went away. I wondered, when will the moment come when I can feel truly at peace with what I have? But that peace always seemed to be one step further away. Until one day, someone asked me a question that changed my life. What would happen if you decided that you are already enough just as you are in this moment? That simple question was like a flash of lightning in the middle of a storm, illuminating the shadows of my mind for an instant. I realized that the scarcity mindset was not an external reality, but a deeply rooted belief. A belief that made me live in a state of constant lack even when I had everything I needed. Thus began a process of internal transformation, a journey from scarcity to abundance. And I understood that the first step was not to have more, but to be more conscious, more grateful, more open to receiving what life was already offering me. Because the shift from scarcity to abundance is not just about accumulating possessions, but about changing the way we see life. I started by asking myself, what things have I been taking for granted? And the list was long. I realized that by focusing so much on what I wanted to achieve, I had forgotten to appreciate what I already had. And in that forgetting, I had allowed the scarcity mindset to take over my thoughts like a shadow that darkens every opportunity for gratitude. Abundance is not something that is measured only in material goods, but in the ability to see the beauty in the everyday, to find fulfillment in every moment. Abundance is a way of living, of loving, of giving and receiving without fear. It is not about ignoring challenges or difficulties, but about choosing to focus on what is already present and flourishing in our lives. A mentor once told me, where you put your attention, you will put your energy, and where you put your energy, that will grow. Those words resonated in my heart, and I understood that to stop living in a scarcity mindset, I had to change my focus. I had to direct my attention toward what I wanted to see grow. I remember doing a small experiment with myself. Every time I felt like I was lacking something, I consciously chose to find something to be grateful for. At first, it was difficult. It was like going against the current, as if the mind wanted to return to the old beliefs of lack again and again. But over time, I began to notice a subtle but powerful change. Gratitude became my anchor, a constant reminder that there was already more than I could see with my naked eye. In this process, I discovered that abundance is not something that is achieved, but something that is chosen. It is a daily decision, a continuous practice. It is the act of letting go of the anxiety of wanting more and embracing the certainty that we are already more than we believe. Abundance is not measured only by what we receive, but by what we are capable of giving from the heart. Someone once asked me, "How can I change my mindset if I've lived my whole life in scarcity?" And my answer was, start by changing the story. You tell yourself because the scarcity mindset is nothing more than a narrative, a way of seeing the world that has been repeated so many times that we have taken it as truth. But the truth is flexible. It is malleable and depends on how you decide to look at it. Today, I want to invite you to pause and ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about abundance? Perhaps, like me, you have been repeating a story of limitation, of lack, of fear. Perhaps the time has come to let go of that narrative and create a new one that reflects the fullness that already exists within you. There is an image that always comes back to my mind when I think about success, that of a large, imposing tree with branches that stretch toward the sky and leaves that sway gently in the wind. People who pass by only see its fruits, the shade it offers, but no one sees what is underneath, the roots that support it in silence, that nourish it, and keep it firm against the storms. In life, we often focus so much on the visible fruits that we forget to take care of what is not seen. We want success, recognition, and abundance, but we rarely stop to ask ourselves, how are my roots? That question completely changed the way I understood what it truly means to be successful. I remember a key moment in my life. I had achieved goals that I had dreamed of for a long time, but upon reaching them, I felt that something was missing, as if the achievements were just a facade of something that was still fragile inside me. It was then that I asked myself that question. What are my roots anchored in? The funny thing is that when you ask yourself that question, the answer is not always comfortable, because when you look inward, you often find weak, superficial roots that have grown without depth due to fear, insecurity, or limiting beliefs. And that hurts. It hurts to realize that you have been building your life on foundations that are not as solid as you thought. That was the moment I decided to work on my roots. It wasn't about getting more or doing more, but about becoming more aware of who I was and what truly sustained me. I realized that roots are those beliefs, values, and principles that anchor us to the ground, and that without them, the fruits may seem impressive on the outside, but lack essence on the inside. A friend once asked me, "How can you tell if your roots are strong?" The answer, although simple, is not easy to put into practice. Your roots are strong when your actions align with your values, when what you do does not depend on external approval but on an internal conviction. I began to reflect on what beliefs and principles were feeding my life. I realized that for a long time my roots had been superficial because they depended on external achievements to feel valuable. And by understanding this, I knew that it was not about giving up the pursuit of success, but about redefining it. Strong roots are not built overnight. They require patience, introspection, and above all, authenticity. You need to dare to look into the deepest part of yourself, to recognize your fears and challenge them, to question those beliefs that you have taken for granted your whole life. And when you do that, you discover that true success is not a destination, but a reflection of the internal solidity you have cultivated. One afternoon, while walking through a park, I stopped to observe an old oak tree. It was enormous, its trunk thick and its branches extending like a hug to the sky. I was left thinking about all that tree had endured: storms, harsh winters, droughts, and yet it was still there, majestic and firm. It was at that moment that I understood: the fruits of success are not held up by the branches, but by the roots. In life, storms are inevitable. There will be moments of uncertainty, challenges, and failures. But if your roots are strong, if they are anchored in a soil of authenticity, solid values, and an unwavering faith in yourself, then those storms will not be able to knock you down. Someone once asked me, "How can I strengthen my roots?" My answer was simple but profound. Know yourself and stay true to who you are, even when the world asks you to change. This is because strong roots are not formed only with external achievements, but with conscious and consistent decisions, with the ability to be honest with yourself, even if that means facing your shadows. Today, I want to invite you to pause and ask yourself, what are my roots anchored in? Perhaps, like me, you have been looking for fruits without realizing that the most important thing was hidden beneath the surface. Perhaps the time has come to go deeper, to nourish those roots with self-love, acceptance, and the certainty that you are enough just as you are. There was a time in my life when I felt trapped, as if I were living inside an invisible cage that I had built myself. I felt that there was something inside me waiting to be released, a version of me that wanted to flourish, but didn't know how to do it. It was as if the potential was there, but the key to unlocking it was hidden in some corner of my mind. That feeling of being held back, of knowing you can give more and be more but not knowing how, is one of the most frustrating experiences that exists, because it's not a lack of ability, but a lack of vision. I remember asking myself over and over again, what is preventing me from reaching my full potential? One day, while talking to a friend who had overcome great obstacles in his life, he told me something that left me thinking. The key to unlocking your potential isn't in looking for more outside, but in discovering what you already carry within. At first, his words sounded philosophical, but I couldn't fully understand them. How is it possible that what I am looking for is already inside me? Weeks passed, and his phrase kept circling in my mind. Then one day I decided to stop, and instead of looking for answers outside, I began to look inward. It wasn't an easy process, because looking within means facing your fears, your doubts, and all those internal voices that have told you that you are not enough. It was a process of emotionally stripping myself bare before myself and accepting what I found. I discovered something fundamental. Potential is not about something you have to find, but about something you have to release. Like a seed that already carries the code of its greatness inside, but needs the right environment to grow. And that environment begins in your mind, in how you talk to yourself, in how you see yourself, and in the beliefs you choose to hold. Someone once asked me, how can I know what my true potential is? My answer was, you can't know it completely, but you can feel it. You can feel that internal impulse, that intuition that tells you that you are more than you think, that there is something in you that is ready to flourish. Potential is not measured in achievements, but in the ability to challenge your own limits and to believe in what you still cannot see. I understood that the key to unlocking potential is to release the mental barriers that hold us captive, and the biggest of those barriers is fear. The fear of failure, the fear of being judged, the fear of not being enough. These fears become chains that tie our wings, and until we face them, we cannot fly. I remember that one day when I felt paralyzed by fear, I asked myself a simple but powerful question. What is the worst that could happen if I dared to take this step? And the answer was that even if I failed, I would at least know that I tried, that I didn't hold back from exploring who I could become. That realization freed me from a large part of the weight I was carrying, Unlocking potential is not a one-time act. It is a daily decision. It's choosing to trust yourself when doubts are strong. It's choosing to move forward when fear whispers to you to stop. It's choosing to dream big when reality invites you to settle. Every day is an opportunity to discover a new part of yourself, a new ability, a new gift that lives deep within. I once heard someone say, "Potential is like a door that has always been open, but you thought it was closed." And I realized how many times I had waited to find a magical key without realizing that the only thing I needed was the courage to push that door and see what was on the other side. I've always believed that there's a kind of magic in life, a subtle force that guides our steps when our desires and our actions are aligned. But for a long time, I didn't understand what that force was. I thought it was luck, coincidence, something external that was beyond my control. Until one day, I realized that that force was conscious intention. I was going through a period of confusion, a time when my days felt repetitive and my goals lacked direction. I had so many ideas, so many dreams, but none of them seemed to find a clear path to reality. I asked myself questions like, what do I really want? And more importantly, why do I want what I want? A friend recommended that I stop and write down all my intentions, not my goals, not my plans, but my deepest intentions. He told me that sometimes the soul knows what it needs, but we don't listen because we're too busy chasing what we think we should achieve. I took a blank sheet of paper and, with some skepticism, began to write. At first, my answers were superficial, full of social expectations and external desires. But little by little, I went deeper, and the words began to flow. It was like peeling layers off an onion. And in that process, I came face to face with the truth of my most authentic desires. I realized that conscious intention isn't just about wanting something, but about putting your heart and mind in the same direction. It's like planting a seed and giving it all your attention, your love, and your energy, trusting that over time it will grow. It is not a simple list of goals, but a commitment to what gives you meaning. In a conversation with a friend, I shared this discovery, and he asked me, "How can I know if my intentions are conscious?" I replied, "When what you desire aligns with who you are, with your values, and with what truly moves you inside, that's where you find conscious intention. It's like an internal compass that guides you, and if you dare to listen to it, it will take you to places you never imagined." In my experience, I understood that the magic of conscious intention is not in wanting everything, but in wanting what is true for you. Sometimes we get carried away by what others expect, by what society dictates, or by what we think will give us validation. But conscious intention arises when you allow yourself to put all that aside and listen to the voice of your soul. I remember reading somewhere that life responds to our deepest intentions, not our superficial expectations. And I began to see how my days changed when I stopped focusing on results and started concentrating on the clarity of my intentions. I discovered that when you act with conscious intention, obstacles become opportunities, and failures become lessons. Someone once asked me, how can I align my actions with my intentions? And my answer was, be honest with yourself about what you truly desire, and then act from that truth. Because when your actions are born from an authentic intention, no effort feels in vain, and no sacrifice is not worthwhile. On this path, I understood that life is not about chasing successes or accumulating achievements, but about living with intention. The intention to grow, to learn, to love, to be true to oneself. And when you live with conscious intention, everything you do makes sense, because every step, no matter how small, takes you in the right direction. There are moments in life when it seems like failure is a constant, a pattern that repeats itself incessantly. It's as if every attempt, every effort, ends up taking you back to the same starting point. In those moments, I found myself wondering if there was something I was doing wrong, or if I was somehow destined to keep falling into the same error over and over again. I remember a time in my life when it seemed like everything I tried fell apart. Every project, every dream became a broken promise, an illusion that vanished before my eyes. I began to question my ability, my worth, my purpose. I asked myself, why do I keep failing? But it wasn't a genuine question. It was more like a whisper full of self-criticism and doubts. It was in the midst of that crisis that I met someone who gave me a completely new perspective. He told me, failure is not a destination but a signal. It's telling you that there's something you need to change. Not about what you're doing, but about how you're doing it. That idea left me thinking for days, because until then, I had seen failure as an enemy, as proof of my inadequacy. But what if failure was nothing more than a messenger who brought with it a lesson that I refused to learn? I decided to do something different. Instead of running toward the next goal, I stopped and looked back, not with judgment, but with curiosity. I observed each of my past failures and tried to understand what patterns were repeating themselves. Was there a limiting belief behind each decision? Was I acting from a place of fear, insecurity, or the need for approval? I realized something essential. Failure is not only the result of a failed attempt, but also a consequence of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Stories that tell us that we are not good enough, that we don't deserve more, that success is only for a few. And those stories become prophecies, invisible chains that tie us to a cycle of repetition. Breaking the cycle of failure is not about avoiding falling, but about learning to get up in a different way. About questioning those beliefs that have been limiting you, and about embracing the possibility of a new beginning, because the cycle is not broken from the outside, but from within. By changing the way you see yourself and the way you interpret your falls. In my process of breaking that cycle, I asked myself a simple but profound question. What have I learned from each failure? And what I found was that each of those difficult moments had brought with it an invaluable lesson. Lessons about patience, about humility, about the importance of perseverance, and above all, about the ability to forgive myself for not being perfect. I discovered that true failure is not falling, but not allowing yourself to learn from the fall. It's giving up before giving yourself the opportunity to discover what you can do differently next time. And in that understanding, I found a kind of liberation, as if the chains of the fear of failure were broken, giving me the freedom to keep trying without the weight of perfection on my shoulders. One day, someone asked me, how can I break the cycle of my failures if it seems that no matter what I do, I always end up the same way? My answer was, don't break the cycle from a place of force, but from a place of understanding. Change the way you see your failures, and you will change the way you relate to them, because the cycle is not broken with resistance, but with awareness and compassion toward oneself. Instead of fighting against your failures, I invite you to see them as allies, as signs that show you which areas of your life need more love, more patience, more courage, because failure doesn't come to tell you that you can't, but to remind you that you are still learning to be who you are meant to be. In life, there are moments when a simple decision can change the course of everything. I'm not talking about external decisions like changing jobs or moving to another city. I'm talking about those internal decisions, invisible but powerful ones that we make when, in silence, we decide not to give up, when we choose to believe in ourselves despite all the doubts and fears that try to hold us back. I remember once, years ago, when I was at a personal crossroads. I had the option of following a path that was comfortable and safe, but that didn't ignite my soul, or taking a leap into the void and betting on my dreams. I spent sleepless nights with 1,000 questions swirling in my mind, but they all came down to one. What am I going to choose? At that time, I was looking for answers outside, as if someone else had the key to my life. There was advice everywhere, opinions of all kinds, but no answer gave me peace. It was then that a mentor told me It's not about what you decide to do, but from where you decide it. That's where the real power is. His words resonated with me and led me to ask myself an essential question. From where am I making my decisions? I began to realize that many times my decisions had been born out of fear, the desire to please others, or the fear of failing. And in that process, I understood that it wasn't the direction that needed to change, but the root of my choices. An internal decision is one that is born from the deepest part of your being, where there is no room for doubt or external judgment. It is a commitment to yourself, to your truth, to your values, and to the vision you have for your life. It's not about choosing the easiest path, but about choosing the one that aligns with your essence, even if that means going through difficulties. Many times, we make decisions to avoid pain, to stay in a place of apparent security. But true security is not found in the external, but in the peace we feel when we know that we are living from our authenticity, because in the end, every external decision is only a reflection of an internal decision. A friend once asked me, "How can I know if a decision is really mine?" And my answer was, when what you choose fills you with peace, even if there is uncertainty around, that's how you know it's yours. Because the decisions that are born from the deepest part of you are not necessarily easy, but they bring with them a kind of internal certainty, a calm in the middle of the storm. In my life, I have learned that internal decisions have a transformative power, because when you choose from your truth, everything around you begins to change. Not because reality magically transforms, but because you change. Your perspective changes, your energy changes, your actions change, and in that internal change, you discover a strength you never knew you had. Beliefs are like invisible roots that shape our lives. We are not always aware of them, but they are there, influencing every decision, every thought, every dream. Throughout my life, I discovered that some of those beliefs were like walls that prevented me from moving forward, like barriers that I myself had built without knowing it. And by recognizing this, a crucial question arose. What is there beyond these limiting beliefs? It wasn't easy to admit that many of my limitations did not come from my external reality, but from my thoughts, from the stories I had told myself. Stories about what I could and could not do, about what I deserved or did not deserve to have, about who I was and who I could never be. I remember a specific moment in a conversation with a friend whom I admired deeply. He shared his plans and goals with me, and I realized that I saw him as someone special, someone with an ability that I didn't have. I said it to him without thinking, and he looked at me, surprised. "Why do you think I can and you can't?" he asked me, and at that moment, something broke inside me. I didn't know how to answer, because I realized that that limiting belief had been mine for so long that it had become an unmovable truth. Limiting beliefs are like that. They disguise themselves as certainties, as indisputable facts. They tell us what is possible and what is not. And without realizing it, we build our lives within those limits. But the truth is that those beliefs are nothing more than opinions, thoughts that we have repeated so many times that we have confused them with reality. One afternoon, while reflecting on this, I decided to make a list of all those beliefs that had limited me for years. It was a revealing and at the same time painful exercise. Painful because each belief reminded me of a time in my life when I hadn't felt enough, when I had let fear define my choices. But it was also liberating because by writing them down, I took away their power, because by seeing them on paper, they stopped being an internal voice and became something I could question. In that process, I realized something fundamental. What we believe about ourselves defines the limits of what we dare to try. And if we want to expand our lives, we must expand our beliefs. We must dare to look beyond those invisible walls and discover that on the other side, there is a world full of possibilities waiting to be explored. Someone once asked me, "How can I go beyond my limiting beliefs?" My answer was, first, you. must recognize them. Then ask yourself, is this really true? And finally, act as if it were not. Because when you act against your own beliefs, you take away their power and begin to build new truths. Breaking a limiting belief is not a one-time act. It is a continuous process. It is a daily choice to question those stories you have told yourself and to write new ones based on trust and not on fear. And every time you choose to challenge a belief, something in your life changes. Maybe not immediately, but over time, you realize that the walls were just mirages, illusions created by your fears and doubts. I've always had this tendency to project myself into the future, to dream of goals to achieve, of places to visit, of people I haven't met yet. I've seen myself running toward those horizons with a mixture of hope and anxiety, trying to anticipate every step and every result. However, in the middle of that race toward what is to come, I found myself getting lost in what was happening right in front of me. I remember a specific night, one in which I was alone, with my mind restless about everything I wanted to achieve and my heart heavy with what I felt I was still missing. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I stopped thinking about tomorrow. It was then that a question arose from the deepest part of me. What am I doing today to create that future I so desire? That question changed me because I understood that the future is not a place we arrive at, but something we build with every decision, with every action, and above all, with every thought. We cannot change what is to come, but we can decide how we want to walk toward it, and that choice is made in the present, in this very instant that we sometimes let slip away because we are so busy dreaming about what will be. In a conversation with a friend, he shared a phrase that made me reflect deeply. The only moment you can create your future is right now. For a moment, those words seemed so simple, but as I repeated them in my mind, they became powerful, because I realized that my whole life I had been waiting for a perfect moment, a signal, an external confirmation to start building my dreams. But the truth is that the perfect moment never arrives. The only thing we have is the present, here and now. I began to ask myself, what small steps can I take today that will bring me closer to the future I desire? And I realized that it was not about making big, drastic changes, but about honoring every present moment, about being aware that every action, no matter how small it seems, has an echo in tomorrow. Someone once asked me, how can I build my future if my present is full of difficulties? And my answer was, it's not about denying your difficulties, but about deciding how you face them and how you choose to grow from them. Because the present may be full of challenges, but those challenges are the raw material with which we can create something new. They are like stones on the path that we can see as obstacles or as stepping stones toward something bigger. In my own process, I understood that building the future is not about waiting for everything to be aligned or for the perfect moment to arrive. It's about starting with what you have here and now, with your imperfections, with your doubts, with your fears, because true power is not in the absence of difficulties, but in the presence of your will to keep moving forward even when the path looks uncertain. They say that habits are the invisible structure of our lives. Those small threads that, without us realizing it, weave every day, every week, every year. But how often do we stop to observe the habits we are cultivating? I remember there was a time in my life when I felt that nothing was changing, that no matter how much I tried, I always came back to the same starting point. It was then that I asked myself an essential question. What habits are building my life? I realized that for a long time I had been waiting for big changes, waiting for an event or a person to come and shake me and transform everything. But by looking more closely, I understood that those big changes would not come unless I started to sow small changes in my daily life. In a conversation with someone I deeply admired, I asked him how he had managed to achieve so many things in his life. He laughed and said, "It's not about doing big things, but about doing small things with consistency." That answer made me question the way I had been seeing my life. I had been looking for the big change, the big leap, without realizing that true transformation happens in the small steps we take every day. I began to reflect on my own habits, those that I had adopted almost without thinking. Some of them were leading me down paths I didn't want to travel, and others were so ingrained in me that I barely noticed them. It was then that I understood that changing my habits was not just a matter of discipline, but of self-love, of recognizing that I deserved a life that reflected the best in me. In that process, I came across the question that everyone asks at some point: how can I change my habits if they seem to be so deeply ingrained? And I realized something crucial. It's not about fighting against them, but about replacing them. It's not about forcing a change through resistance, but about cultivating new habits with patience and compassion for oneself. Someone once told me, "Habits are nothing more than seeds you decide to plant and water every day." That metaphor resonated with me because I realized that habits are not enemies, but reflections of the decisions we have been making over time. And just as we have cultivated habits that limit us, we can also sow habits that propel us to grow. I remember the first habit. I decided to transform my way of starting the day. I used to wake up in a hurry, checking my phone and filling my mind with worries, but one day I decided that I deserved something better. I started waking up a few minutes earlier, to breathe deeply, to be grateful for a new day. It wasn't a big thing, but that small change made a difference in my attitude, in my energy, in my way of facing every challenge. I had always thought that financial reality was like a river that you could only adapt to, a flow that depended on external currents, on what the world decided to give you. For years, that belief became a comfortable justification for my failures and my fears. But one day, in the midst of a moment of crisis, I asked myself a question that changed everything. What if my financial reality doesn't depend so much on the external, but on what I believe and do from within? I clearly remember the feeling of being trapped, as if I were going around in circles and getting further and further away from the freedom I longed for. I felt that no matter how hard I tried, there was always an invisible limit, a barrier that I couldn't break. And in my mind, the blame was on destiny, on circumstances, on everything external, until I realized that there was actually something much deeper that I had to change. One day, while walking through a park, I found myself reflecting on life and how sometimes it seems that all efforts are lost in an abyss of uncertainty. It was then that I stopped, observed the river flowing near me, and realized something essential. You can't control the river, but you can choose which bank to stand on and what direction to take. And by thinking about my financial life, I understood that I had to stop blaming the river and start taking responsibility for my choice of bank. In a conversation with someone who had managed to build a stable and free financial life, I asked him how he had done it. His answer was direct. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of my situation and started seeing myself as the creator of my financial reality. That idea left me thinking for days, because until then, I had never allowed myself to see money as something I could create, but as something that simply came or went according to luck or destiny. The first step to changing my financial reality was to question the beliefs I had adopted over the years, beliefs that said money was scarce, that it was hard to get, or that it wasn't meant for someone like me. I realized that those beliefs were not universal truths, but simple narratives that I had learned and repeated until they became my reality. Then I asked myself, what would happen if I changed the story I tell myself about money? And by asking myself that question, I began to see new possibilities. I started working on my mindset, on my perception of money, and to understand that money is neither good nor bad, but simply a tool that we can learn to use. On my own journey, I discovered that changing your financial reality is not just about external strategies, but about an internal change. It's about cultivating a mindset of abundance, of gratitude, of trusting your ability to create value, and of being patient with yourself during the process, because it's not about taking big leaps, but about taking small, consistent steps in the right direction. Someone once asked me, how can I start to change my financial reality if everything seems against me? And my answer was, start by changing your relationship with money. Stop seeing it as an enemy or as a judge of your worth, and start seeing it as an ally that you can learn to manage. Because money, in its essence, is nothing more than an extension of our decisions, our beliefs, and the confidence we have in ourselves. I had always heard that success is not a matter of speed, but of consistency. They repeated to me that it wasn't important how fast I moved forward, but that I didn't stop walking. But how do you maintain consistency when everything seems to be going against you? How do you keep going when life becomes a sea of doubts and distractions? It was in the middle of a storm of thoughts that I asked myself the question, what is the secret to keeping your mind firm even when the rest of the world is shaking? At that time in my life, every day felt like an internal struggle. I had decided to embark on a path toward my dreams, but every step seemed to encounter a new barrier. Sometimes it was doubts, sometimes fear, and other times a lack of confidence that I was capable of getting there. It was then that I realized that consistency was not just a matter of action, but above all, of mindset. I remember a conversation with someone I admired for his serenity and his ability to stay firm in the midst of any storm. I asked him how he did it, how he managed not to lose focus when everything seemed chaotic. He smiled and said, "Consistency is not found in what you do, but in how you think." That phrase left me thinking for days, because until then, I had been focusing only on the external, without realizing that my real struggle was happening in my mind. It was in those days that I understood that maintaining mental consistency is like taking care of a garden. It's not just about watering the flowers, but also about getting rid of the weeds, about being attentive to what you allow to grow in your mind. You cannot maintain consistency in your actions if your thoughts are inconsistent. If one day you tell yourself that you can, and the next you convince yourself that you are not enough. At that moment, I began to ask myself, what thoughts are feeding my mind every day? And I realized that many of the words I said to myself were limiting, loaded with fear and insecurity. I began to be more conscious of my internal dialogues, and every time a negative thought arose, I would stop and ask myself, is this really true? That simple question helped me challenge the stories I had been telling myself and create a space for something new. One afternoon, while reflecting on this, I decided to create a ritual to keep my mind aligned. I began to dedicate a few minutes at the beginning of each day to affirm my intentions, to remind myself what I wanted to achieve and why it was important to me. It wasn't a radical change, but those small moments of consciousness became an anchor in the midst of the tide of thoughts that tried to distract my attention. Someone once asked me, how can I be consistent when life is so unpredictable? And my answer was, life can be unpredictable, but your thoughts can be anchors that keep you steady. Because consistency is not about controlling everything that happens around you, but about staying true to what happens inside of you. About returning to your center again and again, even when the world around you changes. For years, I had told myself that success was for others, that there were people with more luck, more talent, more opportunities. I lived trapped in that narrative without realizing that those words, those beliefs, were like a program installed in my mind, running silently and sabotaging my dreams. I asked myself, is it possible to reprogram the mind to believe that success can also be mine? The answer didn't come immediately. It was a long process, an internal search that began when I realized that my life was not limited by what was happening outside, but by the stories I told myself inside. There were beliefs installed in my mind like old furniture, taking up space and filling it with dust. And I knew that if I wanted a real change, I couldn't continue living in a house full of limitations. In a conversation with a mentor, I spoke to him about my doubts and the feeling of being trapped in a cycle of self-sabotage. He looked at me and said something I will never forget. "Your mind is like a garden. If you don't choose what seeds to plant, weeds will grow." That image stuck with me and was the beginning of a transformation. I understood that it was not about denying my limiting thoughts, but about recognizing them and deciding if I wanted to continue feeding them. I realized that the mind is reprogrammed through conscious intention, the repetition of new beliefs, and above all, the ability to let go of old stories. It was then that I began to observe what thoughts were programmed in me, those that repeated almost like an echo and that shaped my actions without my realizing it. It was not easy to face them because some of those thoughts had been with me forever, like an old friend that, although toxic, I didn't know how to let go of. One afternoon, I decided to do something different. I took a sheet of paper and wrote down each of those beliefs that I had held about success, money, and my own worth. Then, next to each one, I wrote a new belief, one that reflected the life I truly desired. It wasn't about lying to myself, but about creating a space for new possibilities, about giving myself the opportunity to write a new story. Someone once asked me, "How can I reprogram my mind if I have believed the same thing for so long?" And my answer was, every day you have the opportunity to choose what thoughts to feed. You cannot erase the old ones immediately, but you can stop giving them power, because reprogramming your mind is not about forgetting your past, but about writing new pages that reflect the truth you want to live. On my own path, I discovered that one of the keys to reprogramming the mind is to surround yourself with people, ideas, and experiences that nourish the vision you have for yourself. Just as a garden needs light and water, your mind needs to be fed with thoughts of growth, confidence, and possibilities. And to do so, it is essential to be aware of what you consume, not only in terms of food, but in what you read, what you listen to, and the conversations you participate in. For years, I thought that wealth was simply a matter of numbers, of doing the right calculations, of investing at the right time. But over time, I realized that there was something deeper, something more subtle that I couldn't see with the naked eye. It was as if there were hidden models, invisible patterns that determined who prospered and who struggled tirelessly. It was then that I asked myself a fundamental question. What models of wealth are guiding my life? I remember a key conversation with someone I admired for his financial success. He had built a prosperous life and at the same time one full of purpose. I asked him what his secret was, and he replied with a calmness that denoted wisdom. "True. Wealth is not just what you possess, but the models you believe in and live with." That idea baffled me at first, but it was the beginning of a profound change in the way I saw the world. The hidden models of wealth are those patterns of thought and behavior that we have learned throughout our lives. Sometimes they come from our family, other times from society, from the experiences we have lived, or even from the failures that have left their marks on us. And without us realizing it, those models act as filters, deciding what is possible and what is not, what we deserve and what we believe is beyond our reach. In my case, I had inherited a model of scarcity, a model that made me see wealth as something rare, as something reserved for a lucky few. I hadn't realized that I carried that mindset with me in every financial decision, in every opportunity I let pass. And by recognizing it, I realized that I had the option of changing that model, of creating a new one. I then asked myself, what models of wealth do I want to build? And I knew that the answer was not just in accumulating more, but in redefining what it meant to be rich. I decided that wealth for me would be a combination of freedom, purpose, and the ability to share with others. It was not just about what I could earn, but about how I could contribute and how I could live in harmony with my values. In a conversation with a friend, he told me something that stuck with me. You can't build a rich life if you continue to hold poor beliefs. That phrase was like a mirror, because I realized that I had been trying to create abundance with a mind full of limitations, and that changing the hidden models of wealth is not just about changing your actions, but about transforming the way you see the world. Someone once asked me, how can I discover the hidden models that are limiting me? My answer was, observe your decisions, listen to your thoughts, and ask yourself if they are aligned with the life you want to create, because the models of wealth are not visible to the naked eye, but are revealed in every choice we make, in every opportunity we take or let pass. Throughout my life, I've been fortunate to cross paths with people who profoundly marked my path. Masters who not only taught me lessons, but left an echo in me that resonates to this day. But curiously, the greatest masters did not always come with titles or medals, but with lived stories, with sincere looks, and with hearts willing to share their wisdom. I remember a conversation I had with one of those masters in a small cafe, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of the rain created an atmosphere that invited reflection. I was full of questions, of uncertainty about my future and my purpose, and I asked him with the anxiety of someone looking for definitive answers, how can I know if I'm on the right path? He smiled at me, and after a brief silence, he said, the right path is not about knowing it, but about feeling it. Those words left me speechless, but at the same time awakened something in me that had been asleep. The ability to listen to myself, to trust my intuition. Because deep down, I knew that my doubts did not come from a lack of external clarity, but from a lack of internal confidence. That master taught me that life is not a list of steps to follow, but a dance that is built to the rhythm of each decision, each mistake, each attempt. Sometimes we think that the great masters are distant people, almost mythical figures who seem to be at an unattainable level. But over time, I learned that masters are those who have learned to embrace their own imperfections, to accept their failures, and to see the beauty in every stage of the journey. They are people who teach us not from a place of perfection, but from a place of humanity. On my path, I also discovered that the great masters are not always people. Sometimes they are experiences, moments of pain, of uncertainty, or even of joy. Moments that come to show us something we needed to see, to teach us a lesson that we couldn't have learned in any other way. Once, while going through a personal crisis, I realized that pain, in its essence, was a master that invited me to go deeper into myself, to let go of what no longer served me, and to open myself to a new way of living. A friend once asked me, how can I find a master to guide me? And my answer was, masters are not found. They are discovered when you are ready to learn, because in reality, the masters have always been there. But sometimes we are not prepared to see them. We get lost in the search for perfect answers without realizing that true wisdom is found in experience, in vulnerability, in the willingness to open your heart. At some point in my life, I realized that I was running, but I didn't know where I was going. There were days when I felt like I was doing everything right. Working, planning, striving. And yet, when night came, I found myself exhausted, empty, and with a sense of dissatisfaction that was difficult to explain. It was on one of those nights that I asked myself a question I hadn't had the courage to face before. Am I living to do or to be? We live in a world that celebrates doing, that values productivity, efficiency, and achievement. We are taught to measure our worth by what we do, by what we achieve, by what we manage to obtain. And in that endless race, we often lose the connection with the most important thing, what we are on the inside. I remember a conversation with a very dear friend. She said to me with a calmness that disarmed any worry, "There is a part of you that is enough even when you do nothing." That phrase left me speechless because until that moment, I had never considered that my worth as a person did not depend on my achievements, my actions, or my ability to meet expectations. That idea was completely new to me and led me to a deep reflection on the balance between being and doing. I realized that I had been living as if my purpose in life were a to-do list to complete, as if every day were an opportunity to add more and more things to my life's resume. But that way of living had distanced me from myself. It had made me forget who I really was, beyond my roles and responsibilities. I began to question my relationship with time, with goals, with productivity. I asked myself, what does it mean to be without the constant need to do? And I discovered that being is not a goal, but a way of existing, a way of being present, of being at peace with yourself, even when the world pushes you to do more, to be more. Being is an act of self-love, of acceptance, and of gratitude for who you already are, without the pressure to prove anything to anyone. On my path toward balance, I learned that doing is important, but only when it is born from being. It's like a river that flows naturally from its source, without forcing its course, without fighting against the current. And I understood that balance is not a permanent state, but a constant dance between the two, between being and doing, rest and action, stillness and movement. Someone once asked me, how can I find that balance if my life is full of responsibilities? And my answer was, balance is not found by eliminating responsibilities, but by learning to live from your essence even in the midst of them, because balance is not the absence of action, but the ability to act from a place of peace, of alignment, of authenticity. We live with expectations. Some are imposed on us by society, and others are ones we have created for ourselves, sometimes as a reflection of our insecurities, other times as a genuine desire to improve ourselves. But there comes a moment in life when you ask yourself, what would happen if I challenged my own expectations? What is there beyond what I think I can be or achieve? I remember a time when I felt that my own expectations had become a cage. I had decided who I wanted to be. I had planned every step and had set a standard for myself that didn't allow me to fail, to change course, or to rethink my path. But that pressure didn't give me peace. It gave me a constant feeling of inadequacy, as if I were always running after something I couldn't reach. One day, in a conversation with someone I deeply admired, I shared this internal struggle. He listened carefully and said to me, "Expectations are good guides but bad masters." Those words resonated with me in a way I had never experienced before. I understood that the expectations I had for myself were not there to motivate me, but to keep me in a state of constant dissatisfaction, comparing myself to a perfect version of myself that didn't exist. I began to reflect on what I really expected of myself. Why had I set those expectations so high? Was it because I really believed in my ability to achieve them, or because I was afraid of not being enough without them? And in the midst of those questions, a painful truth emerged. Many of my expectations were not born of love, but of fear. The fear of failing, the fear of being judged, the fear of not being enough. It was then that I decided to challenge my own expectations, not because I didn't believe in myself, but because I wanted to see what I could discover beyond them. I realized that true freedom is not found in meeting everything you expect of yourself, but in daring to be who you are, with all your imperfections, with all your doubts, with all your humanity. One afternoon, I decided to do an exercise. I wrote all my expectations on a sheet of paper, and next to them, I noted how they made me feel. It wasn't easy to face those truths, because behind each expectation, there was a fear, an insecurity that I had been trying to hide. But upon seeing them written down, I felt a kind of relief, as if the weight of perfection had lightened a little. Someone once asked me, "How can I challenge my expectations without feeling like I'm failing?" And my answer was, It's not about giving up on your expectations, but about consciously choosing which ones you want to keep and which ones you can let go of. Because challenging your expectations doesn't mean giving up on your dreams, but allowing yourself to redefine what is truly important to you from a place of authenticity and compassion. Sometimes we live trapped in a routine that repeats itself like an endless loop, where our daily worries and urgent problems make us forget the most important thing: nourishing the mind. For a long time, I thought that enriching the mind was a matter of accumulating knowledge, of reading more, of knowing more. But over time, I discovered that true mental wealth is not measured in what you know, but in how you choose to see the world. I remember a crucial moment in my life when I realized that my mind was full of information, but empty of purpose. I had immersed myself in books, conferences, and talks, looking for answers to questions that I hadn't even stopped to ask myself. Until one night, in the midst of that confusion, I asked myself a question. What does it really mean to have an enriched mind? A person I deeply admire taught me a great lesson without saying a single word. In a quiet conversation, she listened to each of my concerns with a calmness that disarmed any worry. In the end, when I finished speaking, she just looked at me and said, "Wisdom is not found in what you know, but in what you decide to do with what you feel." It was as if all the noise in my mind suddenly dissipated. I realized that I had been trying to fill my mind, but had not learned to listen to it, to give it space to digest and process. I started to ask myself, what does it mean to enrich the mind? And I understood that it's not just about adding new things, but about going deeper into what already lives within you. It's about cultivating the ability to question, to reflect, to observe life with curious eyes and with an open heart, because an enriched mind is not a full mind but a conscious mind, a mind that has given itself the time to empty itself of prejudices to be filled with possibilities. In my own process, I learned to stop looking for answers and to start asking myself better questions. Questions that led me to explore the corners of my mind that I had been avoiding, to face my fears, my insecurities, and to learn to see the value in every lived experience. I discovered that wisdom is not found in accumulating data, but in the ability to connect what you know with what you live and what you feel. Someone once asked me, "How can I enrich my mind if I feel I have so much to learn?" And my answer was, mental wealth is not about what you lack, but about what you choose to nourish every day. Don't seek to know more. Seek to understand better, because an enriched mind is not one that knows everything, but one that has learned to question its certainties, to be humble about what it doesn't know, and to be open to the lessons that life has to offer. There was a time in my life when I thought that dreaming big was a privilege of a few, of those who were born with more opportunities, more luck, or innate talents. I believed that thinking big was a dangerous illusion, a way of risking disappointment. But one day, in the midst of my own doubts, I asked myself a question that changed everything. How big do I allow myself to think? I remember that feeling of wanting more for my life, but at the same time feeling trapped in an invisible cage created by my own beliefs. It was as if every time I tried to fly, an internal voice reminded me of my limitations, my past mistakes, and the times I had fallen. Until a friend in an honest conversation told me, "Don't think big because of what you want to achieve, but because of the person you can become by doing so." That perspective made me see dreams in a different way. I realized that dreaming big is not just a matter of goals, but of vision, of believing in yourself, of giving yourself permission to challenge your own limits. This is because thinking big is not just about achieving success, but about expanding your mind, about opening up new possibilities and breaking down the walls that you yourself have built. I began to reflect on what it really meant to think big. At first, I thought it was about wanting material things, about aspiring to ambitious achievements. But over time, I understood that thinking big is a matter of mindset, of how you choose to see yourself and the world around you. It's an invitation to step out of comfort, to dare to dream without measuring the risk, to trust that there is something beyond what you know. One afternoon, while walking through a park, I stopped to observe a huge tree whose roots extended deep into the earth. It made me think about how nature doesn't set limits for itself to grow, about how a tree doesn't doubt whether it deserves to take up more space or whether its shade is too big. It simply grows, expands, and becomes what it is destined to be. I then understood that thinking big is allowing yourself to be like that tree, to grow without excuses, without justifications, and without asking permission to occupy your space in the world. Someone once asked me, "How can I think big if I've lived my whole life with fears?" And my answer was, thinking big doesn't mean not having fear, but deciding to move forward despite it, because fear will always be there, whispering your limitations. But when you decide to dream big, you take power away from that fear, and you give a voice to your hope, to your confidence that you deserve a life full of purpose and abundance. On my own journey, I learned that thinking big does not mean comparing yourself to others, but comparing yourself to the best version of yourself. It's about asking yourself every day, am I being true to the biggest vision I have for my life? And when I started asking myself that question, I stopped looking for external validation and started honoring my own vision, my own path. Today, I want to invite you to pause and ask yourself, how big do I allow myself to dream? Perhaps, like me, you have been living in the shadow of your fears, believing that you don't deserve to think big or that dreaming big is too high a risk. But the time has come to challenge those beliefs and to open your mind to new possibilities. Throughout my life, money was always a present topic, not only because of its daily necessity, but because of the conversations, the expectations, the promises it seemed to offer, and the fears it awakened. For a long time, I thought that having more money meant being more successful, happier, more complete. But over time, I realized that money is just a tool and that true wealth goes far beyond what you possess. One day, in a conversation with someone I deeply admired, I asked him what success meant to him. I was expecting a conventional answer, maybe a number, an achievement, a goal. But he just looked at me and said with a calm smile, "Success is knowing that you lived in alignment with your purpose, regardless of what you have or achieve." His words left me speechless, because at that moment I knew that deep down I had been chasing something without really knowing why. It was then that I began to question myself. What is there beyond money? I had been so focused on achieving financial stability, on getting that promised security, that I had forgotten the purpose of it all. And I realized that true wealth is not in the amount of money you have, but in how you choose to use it, in how you align it with your purpose, and in the peace you find by living in accordance with what really matters. I understood that, beyond, money is personal transcendence, that feeling of living a life that goes beyond oneself, of leaving a mark on the people around you, of contributing to something bigger than your own desires. I discovered that true wealth is not measured in what you accumulate, but in what you are capable of letting go of to live an authentic life full of meaning. On my own journey, I learned that transcendence is not found in achieving more, but in being more, in choosing to live each day in a way that reflects your essence, your values, your truth. I realized that money by itself could not fill those internal voids, those places in my soul that longed for connection, purpose, and peace. Someone once asked me, how can I find that transcendence when I feel that the only thing I need now is money to live? And my answer was, it's not about denying the importance of money, but about not letting it be the only measure of your worth and your life, because money can offer comfort, but not necessarily fulfillment. It can give you options but not a purpose. True transcendence arises when you decide to use what you have in the service of who you are. When you allow yourself to live beyond the material and explore what really gives meaning to your life. Today, I want to invite you to pause and ask yourself, what is there beyond money in my life? Perhaps, like me, you have been measuring your success by what you have or what you achieve, without realizing that real wealth is not found in what you can possess but in the way you choose to live, in the relationships you build, and in the moments of gratitude you choose to experience. There is a fear that is rarely talked about, a fear that hides behind dreams and longings, but that appears when we are about to reach them. The fear of abundance. It's ironic, isn't it? We grow up wanting more for our lives, imagining what we could achieve and be. But when abundance begins to knock on our door, a subtle whisper invites us to step back, not to open it completely. I encountered this fear on my own path just when opportunities began to emerge. I could feel that something was moving, that my efforts and dreams were bearing fruit, but instead of feeling excitement, I felt a deep unease, a voice that said, "What if I don't deserve this? What if I can't sustain it?" It was at that moment that I realized that I was not only afraid of failure, but also of success. One afternoon, talking with a friend who had traveled a path of personal and professional success, I shared my doubts and fears. He listened carefully and told me something that left me thinking for days. Abundance isn't about what you achieve, but about what you allow yourself to receive. I had never seen abundance that way. I had always related it to achievements, to goals reached, to numbers that would validate my worth. But his words made me see that abundance was, in essence, a matter of worthiness and self-love. I began to reflect on the root of that fear and realized that there were deeply ingrained beliefs that made me feel unworthy of receiving more than I already had. There was a hidden fear that by receiving more, I could lose it, that abundance would bring with it a responsibility that I might not be able to handle. And in that process, I discovered that my fear of abundance was not really a fear of success, but a fear of discovering how far I could go. I asked myself a fundamental question. What stories am I telling myself about what I deserve? And by asking myself that question, I began to question each of those stories. Stories that said that abundance was for others, that receiving more meant risking losing more, that dreaming big was an invitation to failure. Stories that I had accepted as truths, but that were actually just fears disguised as certainties. One day, I decided to write each of those stories and next to them, to write a new narrative. It wasn't easy, because facing those fears meant challenging years of limiting beliefs. But by doing so, I felt that something was being released inside me, as if each written word was a weight lifted, and I began to repeat a simple but powerful truth to myself. I deserve the abundance that comes into my life. Not as an empty affirmation, but as an act of self-love. Someone once asked me, how can I stop being afraid of receiving more than I have? And my answer was, the fear of abundance is not conquered by denying it, but by embracing it. Allow yourself to feel that fear, but don't let it decide for you, because the fear of abundance is only a sign that you are approaching a new place, a place you don't know, but that is full of possibilities. Today, I want to invite you to pause and ask yourself, am I willing to receive the abundance that life has for me? Perhaps, like me, you have been asking for more, wanting more, but at the same time closing the door with the excuse of not being ready or not deserving it. Perhaps the time has come to open that door, to trust that you can handle what comes, and to receive with gratitude and without fear. Sometimes we focus so much on chasing wealth that we forget to ask ourselves an essential question. What is true wealth? And what mark do I want to leave on the world? We live in a society that measures success by the amount of things we accumulate, by titles, by the numbers in a bank account. But what happens when all that fades away? What is left? When time requires us to reflect on the legacy we have built? I remember a deep conversation with an elderly man who had lived a full and, I dare say, rich life. He was not a man of great material possessions, but his eyes reflected a peace and joy that only those who have found a purpose beyond the material possess. He told me about his life, his dreams, his achievements, but what impacted me the most was how he spoke of his relationships, of the people he had touched, and of the stories he had left etched in the hearts of others. At one point, he looked at me with a serenity that transcended any words and said, "It's not about what you leave behind, but about what you sow in the hearts of those who cross your path." It was in that instant that I understood that true wealth is not accumulated, it is sown. It is cultivated in every gesture, in every word, in every action that we do with love and purpose. I realized that a legacy of true wealth is not made of possessions, but of intentions, of the way you choose to live and how you decide to share what you have, whether it is a lot or a little. It's about asking yourself, what seeds am I sowing today that will blossom in the hearts of those around me? Because in the end, everything material fades away, but the connections you create and the love you give remain. They expand. They transcend. In my own process, I asked myself the question, what kind of wealth do I want to leave in the world? At first, I thought that building a legacy was about tangible achievements, about visible successes. But by going deeper, I understood that true wealth is found in the authenticity with which you choose to live, in the way you decide to contribute something positive to others, and in the ability to be true to yourself. Someone once asked me, how can I build a legacy when I feel that I have nothing special to offer? And my answer was, it's not about having something special, but about doing something genuine with who you already are and what you already have, because everyone, regardless of our circumstances, has the ability to sow kindness, to inspire, to be a source of light for someone else. True wealth is not what you possess, but what you leave in the lives you touch. Today, I want to invite you to pause and ask yourself, what kind of legacy do I want to build? Perhaps, like me, you have been measuring your life by what you achieve or accumulate, without realizing that true wealth is found in the intangible, in what you give without expecting anything in return, in the way you choose to impact the world with your essence. This chapter ends, but the journey toward a rich and meaningful life is just beginning, because building a legacy of true wealth is not about reaching perfection, but about living with intention, about choosing to be a better version of yourself every day, and about leaving a mark that inspires others to do the same. And are you willing to build a legacy that transcends the material? Because in the end, life is not measured by what you get, but by what you choose to give, and by the stories you leave etched in the hearts of others. Remember that true wealth is not found in the things you possess, but in the peace of knowing that you lived with authenticity, that you loved deeply, and that you left a legacy of love and purpose. If this audiobook has inspired you, imagine what you can discover with many more. Don't let knowledge and spiritual growth stop here. Explore our complete playlist and immerse yourself in more transformative wisdom. And if you really want to elevate your life from different points of view on spirituality, I invite you to visit my channel, Chronicle of Knowledge, where you will find in-depth spiritual content to continue expanding your mind and your being. Don't miss the opportunity to continue transforming your reality. Take the next step now. Thank you very much.